The red glow of the clock face pierced the heavy stillness of the diner. 3 a.m. A time when most of the city was asleep, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. Outside, the cold clung to everything it touched, slipping through the cracks of the back door like an unwelcome ghost. Inside, the scent of old fryer oil lingered in the air, thick, stubborn, and permanent, like the stories embedded in the peeling linoleum. Jackson stood at the sink, arms bare, water running scalding hot over his hands. The steam rose, curling like smoke around his face. He looked like just another night shift dishwasher, exhausted, invisible, but in reality, he was a man who owned 48 restaurants across 3 states. A man who had built an empire from scratch. Yet here, under the flickering ceiling light of Murphy's diner, he wasn't a boss. He was a silent observer, a ghost in his own machine. Across the kitchen, Lena was hunched over the counter. Her fingers, red from cold, worked with the precision of someone who had done this too many times. She counted coins slowly, reverently, like they were relics from a past life, like they could break if she wasn't gentle. Her breath was visible, fragile ribbons of silver drifting in the dim light. She muttered the numbers under her breath, not out of fear, but out of something heavier, something closer to shame. The jar wasn't anything special, just old glass, scratched and cloudy, its metal lid worn down by years of use. It was tucked behind the freezer, partially hidden by rust and shadows. Lena looked toward the manager's office, dark, empty, then quietly slipped a few bills into the jar and pushed it back into hiding. Jackson's heart pounded, not out of anger, but confusion. The image of Lena, the woman who smiled through exhaustion, who refilled cups without being asked, who laughed with every customer like they were the only person in the room, collided with what he had just seen. His mind split. Was she stealing? Or was it something else? Something deeper? The question twisted inside him like a blade, because that jar wasn't just holding cash. It was holding a secret, a quiet, personal truth. And it was one that could unravel everything he believed about loyalty, about the people who carried his dream night after night. He said nothing. He just stood there, eyes fixed on that patch of floor, as if hoping it might offer him clarity. Deep down, he already knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a truth that would demand more from him than he'd ever given. By the next night, Jackson was gone. In his place was Jack Thomas, a new man with calloused hands, a frayed gray sweater, and a fabricated backstory stamped across a few fake documents. Laid off from factory work, looking for cash under the table. His clean-shaven face and modest demeanor allowed him to slip beneath the radar. He had erased every trace of the man he used to be, because to understand this world, he had to be inside it. Murphy's diner didn't welcome him with open arms. It greeted him with a floor crusted in ancient grease, neon lights that buzzed like dying flies, and the smell of burnt coffee that settled into your clothes and your bones. The dish pit was already drowning in plates, the grime hardened like regret. The manager, Dale, didn't say much, just tossed him a stained rag and disappeared behind the office door, a welcome without words. And then there was Lena. She appeared like breath on a window pane, quiet, delicate, and undeniably present. She moved with instinctive grace, knowing exactly where not to step, like someone who had memorized the weight of this place. When her eyes landed on Jack, she didn't flinch. No judgment, no suspicion, just quiet guidance. She leaned in, showing him how to angle the dishes to avoid the worst of the heat, how to place glasses so they wouldn't break. Her tone was soft. Her smile was the kind that grounded a man who had forgotten what kindness without motive felt like. In that moment, Jackson, now Jack, understood something important. She gave without needing to be seen. She was surviving a place that gave her so little. And still, her first instinct was to protect a stranger's hands from blisters. Then the door chimed. a worn jingle that barely echoed anymore. An old trucker stepped inside, wind still clinging to his jacket like regret. He moved slowly, a lifetime of miles folded into his shoulders. He took his usual booth near the window and asked for pie and black coffee. No sugar. When Lena brought his order, he pulled out a photo, creased, faded. A young boy smiling wide in front of a fishing boat. His grandson. He spoke with the steady rhythm of someone who had seen too much and still found joy in remembering. The stories came in waves, icy highways in the Dakotas, sleeping in the cab while the wind howled like a hungry animal, chasing the edge of every season across the country. Jackson listened from the sink, a strange ache blooming in his chest. Years ago, a man like this had hauled his first industrial oven across the state for next to nothing, believing in a stranger's dream. Could it be the same man? He didn't ask. Some memories are better left whole, untouched by questions. Lena listened too, completely present. She asked the kind of questions that made a man feel like his life mattered. When the bill came, the trucker left a $2 bill beneath the cup. "For luck," he said, as if passing on something sacred. Jackson wanted to thank him. For the moment, for the past, for everything. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he watched Lena, and he understood. This place wasn't just a diner. It was a harbor, a quiet stop on the map of people's lives, and through her, their stories found a way to last. The bell rang again. This time it was noise and warmth and youth. High school kids, arms full of backpacks and half-finished textbooks, flooding into a booth like they were chasing safety. Their voices danced over the hum of the coffee maker, books open to pages stained with ink and hope. After an hour, their laughter softened. One kid turned out his palm. Coins, not enough for another round. Lena walked by, saw the hesitation, and filled their cups to the brim without asking. "Pay me when you can," she whispered. One boy, timid, asked for more sugar. She pressed a full packet bundle into his hand. "Take it for later." Jackson saw everything. No spotlight, no audience, just small acts of care, done with the faith that someone needed them. On the table, beside the steaming mugs, lay a vocabulary notebook. The edges were torn, the pages crammed with translations. English on one side, their dreams on the other. And Lena, in her quiet way, was making sure those dreams didn't go cold. Lena leaned on the edge of the booth with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, but her eyes held more than habit. They held memory. Care. She asked each student for their exam dates, repeating their names softly until she got them right, as if learning them gave her a quiet power. When one of the girls shyly pulled a test paper from her bag, its corner marked with a bold, triumphant red score, Lena's smile grew into something wider, deeper. It wasn't pride born of ownership. It was pride that knew struggle, the kind that came from once walking the same uphill road. Outside, the wind clawed at the windows like a restless animal, but inside that booth, a gentler storm swirled, one made of belief and borrowed confidence. Warmth didn't come from the heater, but from the way Lena made them feel seen, known, like their success mattered to someone besides a teacher with a red pen, like they were worth betting on. Then the door opened again. A man stepped inside, bent forward against the cold, like he was walking into a storm that had followed him his whole life. His coat was no match for the weather, thin, threadbare, clinging to him like a worn-out memory. His hands were mottled and raw, skin flaking in patches from exposure. But it was his eyes that told the real story. That vacant, weary stare of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be warm, on the outside and in. Without a word, Lena poured him a coffee so hot the steam spiraled into the air like a fragile hope. She added a slice of pie, small, humble, but slipped in an extra piece when no one was looking. A silent act of defiance against whatever world had tried to erase this man's dignity. He took the farthest booth, the one half draped in shadow, like he didn't want to be seen or didn't believe he deserved to be. From the dish pit, Jackson saw it all. But it wasn't the man's hunger that gripped him. It was the cuffs of Lena's jacket, frayed, torn, worn down from winters past. The sleeves thinned at the elbows, the color drained from too many washes. She wasn't serving from excess. She was giving from what little she clung to herself. That mattered. That meant something. She crouched beside the booth, speaking low so no one else could hear. "Do you have somewhere warm to sleep tonight?" The man hesitated, guilt flickering across his face like a shadow trying to escape the light. Lena didn't press. She simply tore a napkin and scribbled an address, a shelter a few blocks away. No questions asked. He nodded, never quite meeting her eyes, his gratitude and shame mixing into something heavier than either emotion on its own. "Thank you," he whispered, voice frayed like his coat. Jackson felt something shift inside him. The scene, so quiet and small, burned into his memory like a seam reinforced by hand, meant to hold under the weight of the world. Not long after, the morning waitress reached into her apron and pulled out an envelope. It was soft, worn, anonymous. Inside, the exact amount she owed for rent. Not $1 more, not $1 less. She stood in the middle of the diner, voice gentle but firm. Did someone drop this by mistake? Heads shook. Conversations resumed. Forks clinked. No one claimed it. Behind the counter, Lena didn't look up. She arranged silverware with obsessive care, as if perfection could excuse her silence. Jackson, from his place at the sink, caught the smallest tremor in her wrist as she poured another cup of coffee. The pot jiggled faintly in her grip. The waitress found a note folded with the bills, written in a hand just messy enough to hide behind humility. "Keep your home first, then worry about work." In the kitchen, the scent of cinnamon drifted from fresh pies cooling on the rack. There was a warmth to it, something soft, domestic, almost maternal, the kind of smell that made a space feel like sanctuary. For a few moments, the diner exhaled. Peace lived in the corners. Dale stormed through with a clipboard, blind to the note, the envelope, the shift in air. He muttered numbers and vanished. Jackson's eyes returned to Lena. Her face gave nothing away, but it was in her silence, in her stillness, where the truth nested. She didn't need the spotlight. Her acts of grace lived in the quiet. He remembered. The nights when his mother, hands cracked from scrubbing, legs swollen beneath nylon stockings, came home late from her diner shift. Her body wore fatigue like a second skin. Dinner was often silence and overcooked beans. Her smile stretched over weariness she never named. One night, her tip jar came up light. Someone had stolen from it. She didn't cry, just said, "Guess I counted wrong," and turned away. Jackson had been just a boy then, sitting at the table with a plate of fried onions and the stale scent of fryer oil stuck in his hair. But something sharp lodged in his chest that night. A vow, unspoken but solid. This wouldn't happen again. Not to her. Not to anyone like her, if he had anything to say about it. Later that same night, she tiptoed into his room, pulled the blanket up over him with hands that still smelled like dish soap. He pretended to sleep, but he heard her sigh, the kind that empties a soul. Years later, when Jackson secured the loan to start his first restaurant, that memory returned like a phantom. And now, in this greasy kitchen of chipped tiles and bad lighting, the promise pressed against his ribs again. Somewhere here, someone carried that same weight, and maybe, just maybe, it was Lena. Dale reappeared just long enough to drop a stack of dirty trays beside the sink. "Get to it," he said, before locking himself in his office again. Kevin lingered near the prep line, glancing at Lena every few minutes. Jackson noticed. The way Kevin's eyes tracked her movements like tally marks. It made his skin crawl. Jackson said nothing, just focused on stacking dishes properly. Let the scalding water blister his hands. Endure it. That's what his mother had done. That's what Lena did now. Later, Lena spotted his raw palms. Quietly, she left a packet of bandages by the sink. No comment, no pause. Just there when he needed them. Jackson didn't thank her, but inside, something moved. A regular waved her over. She nodded without asking. "Over easy, light salt," she said, already pouring his coffee like she could still taste yesterday's order. Nearby, a spoon clattered to the ground. Jackson bent to pick it up. The cold metal stung his fingertips, reminding him again. Nothing here was easy. That night, his mental ledger grew thicker. A catalog of moments, bandages, whispers, stolen glances, silent generosity, all leading to one question that haunted him. The jar behind the freezer. What was it really for? What was she feeding with such care? When the end of shift count came in light, Dale barely reacted. His voice was tired, mechanical, habitual. Lena didn't argue. "Let me count again," she said, calmly, already sorting the bills. Face blank, composed. Kevin leaned in beside Jackson, voice low, calculated. "She got fired from her last job, stealing." The word stung. Jackson's memory flicked to the jar, to Lena slipping bills into it. The timeline, the pattern. It matched, and yet none of it fit. The woman who handed out pie to hungry strangers, who offered sugar like a secret, who left bandages for blistered hands and rent money in an envelope. Could she also be taking from the register? Outside, night hung heavy like ink, spilling into the alley behind the diner. The dish machine rattled on, steam, heat, pressure, pulsing like a heartbeat that warned something was coming. At booth 3, a man who always found something to complain about left without a fuss. A folded 10 rested on top of his check, more than he owed. Lena caught it before it reached the till and turned. "You overpaid," she said, handing it back like it cost her nothing. No hesitation, no performance. From the sink, Jackson felt something in his chest unclench, then seize again. The story wasn't over, but it was close. Was it real? That honesty in her voice? Was it pure instinct, or something honed over years, shaped by a world that demanded women like her walk a fine line between invisible and immaculate? Jackson wasn't sure, but near midnight he saw her again, drifting toward the freezer. The faint overhead light caught the sharp line of her jaw, just long enough to reveal something buried underneath. Was it fear or determination? Her fingers curled tightly around the old glass jar, the faint clink of it tapping the metal shelf like a secret knocking to be let out. The lid creaked as she twisted it, metal against glass, a sound far too loud in the quiet. Her hands trembled as she slipped bills inside. Jackson held his breath, the air thick and dry in his throat, as if dusted with salt and questions. She stayed behind the freezer for several minutes. When she returned, her hands were empty, her walk light, quick, like someone tiptoeing out of a room where they never belonged. The scent of fryer grease clung to his sleeves now, sticky and stale, mixing with the clean snap of laundry detergent. That smell was beginning to feel permanent, just like the unease. The question that had haunted him at the edges of every shift was no longer a whisper. It had sharpened into something undeniable. What was she hiding? And why was the truth buried in that jar? By the third week, Jackson had stopped pretending. His notes, once casual, had become a ledger, a timeline etched into a grease-stained order pad. The pattern was as clear as the burn on his hand. The jar always appeared between 2:35 and 2:55 a.m., every single night. When the diner was still and the night shift moved like molasses, she lingered longer. And every time she closed, the register came up short. Not drastically, but enough to trace. He once asked her, softly, in passing, trying to sound casual, "Did table 7 leave much tonight?" Her reply was smooth, too smooth. "Not really," she said, already reaching for the half and half like the question had been nothing more than small talk. Her face didn't flinch. Kevin, lounging near the prep station, muttered without even looking up. "Count it twice. Otherwise you'll be the one holding the bag." Jackson glanced toward the dented chrome refrigerator and caught his reflection. Warped, blurred. He hardly recognized himself. Underneath the apron and the fake name, he was starting to feel like a man undone, fragmented between belief and suspicion. The noise of dishes slamming into the machine kept time with the rhythm of his doubt. Steady, unrelenting. The ink on his chart grew darker every night, a bruise that wouldn't fade. This wasn't randomness. This was ritual. A clockwork secret ticking under Lena's soft smile. Then came the incident at booth 2. An older man, gray hair thinning, eyes blinking fast, searched his jacket pockets with rising panic. "My wallet's gone," he said, breath catching in his throat like a fishhook. Lena was there before anyone else. She slid into the booth across from him, her voice low and even, like it could anchor him. "Let's call your bank," she said, already dialing. She guided him through every step, pause, explain, freeze the card, while her own eyes scanned the room. When the check came, she quietly pulled bills from her own apron, tucked them under the receipt. No hesitation. Jackson caught it all from the dish station, the flicker of pale in her cheeks, the way her mouth drew tight. But her hands never trembled. "You saved me from a bad night," the man said, clutching her hand with the desperation of someone who wasn't used to being helped. And for a moment, Jackson felt shame bloom in his chest. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe all his charts and patterns were shadows cast by his own mistrust. But the register logs told another story, one with missing numbers and recurring voids. The contradiction tightened like a knot. Lena folded the signed check into her apron and moved on, refilling coffee like nothing had happened. The night outside drew in like a closing curtain, the windows fogging, the hum of the diner softening into drowsy silence. Then Dale appeared in the break room doorway, arms crossed, voice dry. "Hours are getting cut. Too much loss. Not sustainable." Lena didn't argue, didn't even blink, just nodded once, slow and small, as if she'd expected it. Around the room, murmurs bubbled up. Someone whispered, "You think maybe..." But the sentence died in midair, unfinished, like most hard truths. Rico sat at the edge of the room, head bowed, thumbnail raw from picking. He stared at the linoleum floor like it might offer a lifeline. He didn't look at Lena, and she didn't look at him. But Jackson noticed her silence. It wasn't weakness, it was armor. A worn coat pulled tight in a storm, not to shield her heart, but to survive. An hour later, the new schedule went up on the corkboard. Her name showed less and less, gaps spreading where her shifts used to be. The air in the diner shifted with it, quieter, colder, like everyone was bracing for something unseen. Rico walked slowly past the spice rack, tray in hand, body slouched with fatigue. Then he buckled. Just for a second. Lena caught him before the tray could crash. She whispered, "Go home," so softly Jackson barely caught it. From the back, Dale shook his head. "Short-staffed," he said, like that was the only fact that mattered. But Jackson saw what Dale didn't. The pale bruises just visible beneath Rico's too large shirt sleeve, the ones that hadn't been there last week. The shirt swallowed him now. He was shrinking. "I'm fine," Rico insisted, voice cracking like old wood. But Jackson knew better. He didn't just feel concern. He felt premonition, cold, bitter, certain. And then, like a thread unraveling, the thought came. What if Lena wasn't hiding the money for herself? What if that jar was keeping Rico alive? The wind howled, pressing hard against the diner's thin door. A man stumbled inside, shaking, his coat too thin for the cold. Lena didn't hesitate. She shrugged off her own jacket and laid it over his shoulders. The fabric was already fraying at the seams. It wasn't much, but to him, it was everything. Jackson stepped forward, instinct pulling at him. She stopped him with a look. "He's colder than I am," she said simply. A button popped from the coat as she adjusted it. She only laughed. "Doesn't matter. It was meant to be given away." The man's eyes welled, one tear tracing the lines of his face like a roadmap of all he'd endured. Acts like that don't need an audience. But Jackson was there, and he would remember. Later, the old truck driver returned to his usual booth, pie and black coffee. Somewhere between bites, he started telling a story about a winter night years ago. A young man, a broken oven on the highway. "He had these eyes," the man said, tapping the table. "Eyes that said he'd finish what he started." Jackson felt his throat tighten. It was him. He almost said it, almost confessed. But the moment wasn't his. So instead, he listened as the trucker pulled out another worn $2 bill and slid it across the table. For luck, Lena picked it up on her way by, folded it gently into the edge of the order pad. Her hand moved with quiet reverence. Her smile was soft, knowing. The warmth it left behind was real, steady. Jackson leaned back, memories colliding in his chest. His mother's cracked hands, her tired smile, the promise he made long ago. Maybe the moment to fulfill it was closer than he thought. Kevin leaned on the counter, voice loud enough to cut through the quiet. "Funny how generous people get when they've got their own stash." Lena didn't respond. She just picked up a rag and kept wiping the same spot on the table, over and over, until it gleamed. Later, Jackson asked Kevin, light, careful, if he really believed what he'd said. Kevin shrugged. "Everyone says it." The words stuck in Jackson's brain like mildew. Rotting. Infectious. From the kitchen door, Dale overheard and called out, "You got proof?" "Number." But Dale's brow furrowed anyway, and walked away with that seed of doubt trailing behind him like a bad smell. That night, Jackson noticed something else. A recorded tip. Smaller than what he remembered seeing. Just a few dollars. But it landed in him like a stone. The gap between who he believed Lena to be and what the numbers were whispering was growing tighter. Each shift, trust eroded just a little more. And somewhere near the front, a spoon clinked against a mug. Sharp, piercing, a sound that shouldn't matter. But somehow, it did. Hail battered the diner's windows, the sound muffled but relentless, like the world outside was knocking, trying to remind them how cold it had become. Inside, the register rang light. Coffee refills had outpaced actual tips, and the night was slipping into that weary hour where even silence starts to feel heavy. At exactly 2:45, Lena drifted toward the freezer again. But this time, she didn't reach for the jar right away. Her hand hovered over the lid, unmoving. She stood still, unnaturally still, her eyes scanning the room not just for safety, but for something else, something she might have missed. Her gaze lingered in the corners, on shadows that hadn't moved, as if she expected them to whisper a warning. Then her hand lifted slowly to her chest, pressing gently, counting heartbeats or steadying nerves. Either way, it looked like someone bracing for impact. Jackson moved half a step forward from the dish pit. Instinct said, intervene, interrupt this moment before it unfolded too far. But something held him back. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was doubt, or maybe it was the part of him still haunted by the truth he didn't want to see. Their shadows met beneath the buzzing overhead light, stretched and merging along the slippery linoleum. She disappeared behind the freezer, the moment swallowing her whole. When she emerged minutes later, her eyes shone, not from guilt, but from whatever pain she'd faced in the dark. Jackson caught the ragged edge of her breath, thin and fraying, like it had to force its way through something lodged deep in her chest. This was not the rhythm of deceit. This was the breath of someone surviving by fragments, one decision at a time. She moved quietly, rejoining the floor just as a small discrepancy appeared at one of the tables. Another tip, a few dollars shy. Lena noticed it instantly. Without a word, she reached into her own apron and corrected it, sliding the missing bills into the register with the same grace as someone straightening a crooked frame. "Small things ought to be done right," she murmured. Jackson watched her hands. They didn't tremble. "Why not just tell Dale?" he asked. She looked over her shoulder, lips pulling into a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Saves everyone the trouble," she said, and returned to wiping down the counter. From the side, Kevin's glance was sharp, accusation buried beneath indifference. He walked away without a word, leaving a tension in his wake that felt like a frayed wire snapping underfoot. Dale wasn't around that night. Typical. Jackson's notebook thickened again, but the facts weren't simple. They stacked like a teetering tower, generous acts side by side with numbers that didn't balance. On the last line of the page, he didn't write facts. He wrote a question. A bad person doing good things, or a good person doing bad things? Later, in the stillness of his rented room, that question gnawed at the corners of his mind. He lay in bed, the words wrapping around his throat like vines, tugging him back into everything he'd seen. Lena bent over a table she didn't owe anything to. That jar, that pause, that pain. The shift had ended, early for her. Her apron was already folded, her hands clean, the quiet weight in her posture saying more than any complaint could. When she left, Jackson waited, counted to 60, then stepped out into the cold. He followed at a distance, the city's hum swallowing his footsteps. She walked like someone on a mission, focused. Her coat cinched tightly around her, shoulders hunched not against the wind, but against the burden she carried. At the edge of a dimly lit block, beneath a flickering street lamp, she stopped. Another woman waited there, hair messy, drawn tight with fatigue. Her stance was taut, protective. Lena pulled a small envelope from her pocket and handed it over. No counting, no question, just an exchange done quietly, like a prayer. A soft murmur passed between them, then a hug. Quick, restrained, meaningful. The woman left first, her steps dragging. Jackson's eyes drifted to her shoes, worn leather, cracked at the seams, one sole flapping loose. It wasn't the image of desperation that struck him. It was the quiet resolve not to ask for more than what was given. A gust of wind snapped through the alley, cutting along his neck like cold regret. He didn't follow further, just stood in place, letting the image of them dissolve into distance, while the question walked beside him like a shadow. Back at the diner, the old trucker leaned forward, squinting. "You look familiar," he said, voice low, fork suspended mid-air. Jackson's heart pounded. He managed a crooked smile. "Probably a cousin of a friend," he offered with a shrug. The man studied him longer than comfort allowed, then nodded. Not convinced, but not pressing. Lena arrived with a plate. "From the kitchen," she said, setting it down. No charge. The man's face lit up, and he launched into a story. Ice storms, long hauls, and a truck that should have died on the road but didn't. Jackson listened, his throat dry. Every detail mirrored the night he remembered. His memory, but he said nothing. Just let the man speak. In his notebook later, he wrote only one thing. The longer you hold a secret, the heavier it gets. And it was getting heavy. Dale called a meeting by the register. His voice was short, sharp. "This shortage has gone on too long." Lena stepped forward. "Let me double-check the books." But Dale cut her off. "No." From the side, Kevin said without looking at her, "Might want to check the freezer area." The shift in the room was immediate. Glances flicked toward Lena, bladed, silent, cold. She didn't flinch, but the air contracted around her. Jackson lowered his eyes, then spoke. "Could be the counter. Those machines glitch." Dale turned to him. "The machine or the person?" No one spoke. Somewhere, a spoon hit the floor with a clang that felt far too loud. Lena didn't react, didn't defend. She stood straight, her chin held steady. It was the posture of someone refusing to break, even when everything pointed at her. Her Jackson didn't need to write this moment down. It was etched already. Outside, the rain had shifted from hail to a steady, drumming downpour that blurred the world behind the glass. The diner felt smaller, quieter, like it was holding its breath. At 2:40, Lena returned to the freezer, but she didn't reach for the jar. She just stood there, her eyes rimmed red. Then, a coin slipped from her fingers, bouncing on the tile with a soft chime, rolling toward the wall until it wedged between two floor panels. She knelt slowly, fingertips grazing the cold grit until she found it. She held the coin like it might dissolve. And when she placed it into the jar, it was slow, reverent. As if each coin were more than currency, it was meaning, it was choice. Jackson saw it. Not theft, but ritual, not greed, but something closer to a plea. Rico didn't show that night. His apron hook stayed empty. The only message, feeling worn out. Lena covered his shift, never asking, never complaining. She moved with practiced rhythm, but each step looked heavier, her eyes darker. And yet, she kept going, tray after tray, smile after smile. And all the while, the jar waited behind the freezer. Like a heartbeat. Like a secret. Lena lingered at the end of each order, her eyes scanning the tip lines longer than usual, as if willing the numbers to change. Jackson noticed the tremor in her hand when she wrote down the totals. It wasn't fatigue. It was something more fragile, a tension beneath the skin. Her lips pressed into a thin line, holding in the pressure of the moment like steam under a kettle lid. When he asked quietly, "You okay?" she deflected without missing a beat, turning the conversation toward the coffee machine, pouring a cup she didn't need to serve. From across the room, Kevin smirked into his mug. "Probably busy counting her own stash," he muttered, loud enough to land. Jackson's hand tightened around his spoon, the metal groaning under the strain. Part of him wanted to believe the simplest version of her, the woman who gave away coats and smiled with tired kindness. But the numbers in his notes didn't vanish with faith. They waited, cold and unyielding, like frost on glass. In the back, he spread the receipts across the counter. Heat from the nearby coffee maker had curled the paper edges, but the ink still spoke plainly. One by one, he checked them against his notes. Names, amounts, timestamps. A pattern formed like cracks in old paint. Tips logged were lower than what customers had said aloud. The discrepancies clustered around the same hours. Always Lena's closings. Halfway through the pile, a crumpled slip snagged his attention. The handwriting shifted halfway through. Same ink, but different pressure. The numbers at the bottom arched awkwardly, the rhythm off. Someone had altered it. Kevin passed by and caught the mess of papers. "Who's got time to mess with that stuff?" he said, shrugging. The words were light, but Jackson heard the strain behind them. Then Dale walked in, tapping the table with 2 fingers. "Deadline's up soon. We need this sorted." There was no mistaking the subtext. Figure it out, or someone's getting cut loose. Jackson stared at the receipts. Each one a decision. Each one a potential mistake he couldn't afford. He could lose someone innocent or expose someone desperate. And he couldn't shake the truth. Some crimes come from survival, not corruption. But tonight, the guessing would end. Outside, snow threatened the streets with the quiet promise of erasure. It would cover tracks, blur facts, even bury the truth. If you waited long enough. At 2:58, the back door whispered shut behind Lena. Jackson followed at a distance, the alley wind slicing across his cheeks. Lena stood near the clean trash bins, the jar in her arms, cradled like something breakable. Her breath came in pale clouds, each one catching moonlight before vanishing. She cupped her mouth and murmured numbers softly into her palm, like she was praying, like she was begging the night for just a little more time. Jackson moved closer. His heel skidded across a strip of black ice. The sound, sharp and sudden, split the silence. Lena spun, clutching the jar tighter. Her eyes, wide with alarm, locked on him. She didn't speak right away. Then, in a voice that cracked mid-word, she said, "Please, don't take it. I'm almost there." That one word, "please," cut through him deeper than accusation ever could. He swallowed hard. "Who's it for?" She hesitated, gaze dropping, then rising to meet his fully. "Rico," she said. Just his name. But it was enough. The air between them froze. The night, for once, listened. Piece by piece, the story came out. Rico, just 15, thin, pale, quiet, diagnosed with acute leukemia. Treatment existed, but the insurance company had classified it as experimental. No coverage. The deposit had to be paid out of pocket. Every delay tipped the scales further from survival. His mother, working 2 jobs, barely standing, had scraped together what she could. The rest, Lena had taken on herself. She hadn't stolen. Not exactly. She'd borrowed from tips, slipped bills from the till on slow nights, but always returned them on payday. She'd sold her jewelry, cut corners on meals, chosen pain over pride, again and again. Each trip to the alley wasn't a secret kept. It was a silent vow honored. Jackson listened. Every word reshaped the picture he thought he'd painted. The word thief cracked and fell apart in his mouth. He wanted to believe her. No, he did believe her. But the businessman in him had been forged in fire and failure. Verification mattered. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Don't be sorry. Help the boy." They stood face to face, the jar between them like a fragile confession. His mind flashed to his mother again, her swollen ankles, her cracked hands, and the promise he'd made to never let someone else suffer what she did. That memory reached for him now. He knew what came next. He would verify every part of this, not because he doubted, but because real help had to stand on truth. By morning, he had names, addresses, and documents. The building leaned under the weight of its own history, paint blistered and siding peeling. Jackson knocked lightly. The woman who answered was the same one from the night before, hair tied back, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Inside, the scent of antiseptic filled the air. Plastic bags sat by the door, full of gauze, syringes, medical tape. He asked gently, "Rico?" She froze, then nodded, slowly. "He works at Murphy's," she said. Her voice trembled with both pride and worry. Everything clicked. Jackson called in a favor. A friend in medical records sent over the file, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The forms were stamped with denials, experimental, not covered. The deposit was $18,000. Monthly meds, over $2,400. The latest appointment had been delayed, payment incomplete. Tucked between the pages was a note, a tiny scrap with faded ink. 3 words. "Keep going, Rico." The handwriting was rushed, slanted. Lena's. Jackson's hands curled into fists. Back at Murphy's, Dale stood by the register, a stack of paperwork in hand. His voice clipped, already halfway to judgment. Disciplinary review, shortages, effective immediately. Kevin's smirk was poison. "Might as well check the freezer." Lena didn't flinch. She said nothing. Jackson stepped forward. "Tonight, we count. Together." The drawer opened. Receipts laid out. Paper shuffled. Numbers aligned. Then, it happened. Someone reached for the freezer, and the jar was gone. Dale's voice cracked through the tension. "See, I told you." Lena went pale. "That's not possible," she whispered. Jackson raised his voice. "Check the storage room." They rushed in, the scent of bleach and cardboard heavy in the air. In the corner, a black trash bag bulged unnaturally. A single heartbeat passed. Then someone pulled it open. And there it was, the jar. The plastic stretched tight as Jackson tore the bag open. The jar tumbled out, its lid rattling loose. Coins scattered across the floor like a chorus of echoes no one could ignore. 1/4 rolled, spinning, and then wobbled to a stop with a final, emphatic clink that silenced the room. Kevin's face drained of color. Then, just as quickly, red surged back into his cheeks. His eyes darted wildly, from the jar, to the door, to the floor, then nowhere at all. The truth was suddenly here, exposed, fragile, undeniable, and no one moved. Lena's eyes found Kevin's, holding steady, unwavering. Jackson opened his mouth, but she shook her head gently, one firm gesture that asked for trust. "Let me handle this," she said, her voice stripped of anger, a quiet strength carrying more authority than a shout ever could. Kevin sagged, his shoulders collapsed inward like a man unraveling. "I was just curious," he muttered. The excuse hung in the air like smoke from a dying match, thin, weak, transparent. Dale's breath came sharp. His pen scraped across a termination form already halfway written. Jackson laid his hand over the paper. "Not yet." Lena stepped forward. She picked up the jar, wiping the rim with the corner of her apron as if it were sacred, glass chiming softly under her fingers. Every movement was careful, restorative, like stitching a wound that deserved tenderness. "Tomorrow," she said without looking up. "I'll leave my shift early." No one asked why. They didn't need to. Meaning swelled behind her words like light behind a frosted glass. Kevin kept his eyes on the floor. Dale clenched his jaw. And Jackson, he felt the strange friction of two forces colliding, relief and the ache of justice being gently rerouted by compassion. In that moment, Lena was still giving more than she guarded. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic, sharp and metallic. Rico lay in a recliner, small and pale, his eyes closed against the weight of the week. A single fourth line ran from the crook of his arm, swaying faintly with each breath. His mother stood to greet Jackson, then looked down quickly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the voice of someone used to apologizing for needing help. Jackson wanted to tell her his real name, to drop the mask, but this moment wasn't about him. He rested a hand on the metal frame of the chair. The chill bled into his skin, anchoring him to the weight of everything he hadn't seen soon enough. "We'll manage," she said, her smile brave and brittle. The IV drip clicked like a clock running out of time. The decision had already been made in his chest. The moment required no more words. Back at Murphy's, the old freezer hummed softly. Lena returned to the shelf, fingers trailing the edge of the familiar glass. But tonight, something was different. A plain envelope balanced on top. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a stack of bills, crisp, folded, counted. She counted once, then again. It was the exact amount left for the month's payment. No more, no less. Atop the stack, a small note written in slanted, unpolished ink. For the angel in the kitchen. Her vision blurred. She closed her eyes. "Let the sting come without shame." Her breath fogged the jar, leaving a faint halo on the glass, like a quiet blessing. She held it close, like a heartbeat made of hope. Across the kitchen, in the shadowed corner, Jackson stood still, arms relaxed. For the first time in weeks, the tension was gone. There was no need for thanks, no need for explanations, just the quiet knowledge that somewhere a boy was a day closer to living. A smile lifted the corners of his mouth. Not wide, not loud, but real. Morning slid through the blinds upstairs. On the table, a thick envelope waited alone. On top, a letter. For Rico, and for everyone you've ever helped. Beneath it, a check, $30,000. The numbers shimmered in her hands, impossible, not just because of their size, but because of what they meant. Time, stability, continuation. A breath caught in her throat as she read the rest. "We want you to lead a community program for the whole chain." Her hand trembled. She had never held a number like this. Not on paper, not in possibility. Then Jackson appeared in the doorway. No disguise, no frayed sweater. His coat pressed, his eyes steady. "I'm sorry it took me this long," he said. She didn't reply right away, just placed the envelope gently back on the table, anchoring it with the weight of every night that had come before. Then silence fell again. But this time, it was not empty. It was shared. Jackson stepped forward and laid down the whole truth. The watching, the suspicion, the doubts he had recorded like crimes. He confessed each page, each moment, not as defense, but as surrender. Lena didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. She let the silence between them absorb it all. Finally, she said, "Thank you for checking the truth before you judged it." He told her about his mother, her swollen feet, the promise he made as a boy, the truck driver who had once saved his dream with a favor. She nodded. "People are hungriest," she said, "when no one believes them." They both turned and looked down through the railing to the diner below. The booths, the coffee, the quiet rhythm of care passed hand to hand. Everything worth saving was down there. They didn't shake hands. They didn't sign papers. Their agreement formed in the quiet between trust found and trust kept. 1 year later, the Chicago hall was full. At the main table, coins spelled out. The tip jar saved us. Light flickered across copper and silver, a mosaic of redemption. Lena stood at the podium. Her voice was calm, sure. She spoke of nights where hope was thinner than a paper napkin, of mornings when one act of kindness kept the lights on in a stranger's kitchen. Rico sat in the front row, healthier now, eyes bright, a faint scar his only reminder. He wanted to study social work, to become the person who stepped in before someone fell. Across the company, new jars had appeared. In every break room, in every diner, some chipped, some still carrying the scent of coffee. Each coin no longer represented money. It represented a promise. Applause filled the hall, not explosive, but steady, warm, the kind of sound that feels like rain after a long drought. In the back, Jackson sat, hands on his knees, watching quietly. He didn't need to speak. The room did it for him. That evening he stopped by Murphy's. The walls glowed cream. The air smelled like cinnamon, familiar, comforting. Behind the counter, a young employee, Jenna, slipped a folded bill into the jar. She froze when she saw him. "It's for the staff kids' scholarship," she said shyly. "Lena says the best recipe is the one that's shared." The bell above the door chimed softly as a couple entered, laughing. Jenna greeted them like family. No cameras, no speeches, just people doing the right thing because they could. The jar sat in plain sight now, not a hiding place, a beacon. Coins gleamed like tiny suns trapped in glass. Jackson stayed a moment longer, breathing it in. The cinnamon, the calm. It was different now. The weight was gone. Only warmth remained. He nodded to Jenna, and she nodded back, not knowing who he was, but knowing enough. Then he stepped outside. The night wasn't quiet. It was peaceful, and that peace burned bright. A single coin landed in the jar. Its ring stretched outward, thin, clear, echoing like a horizon. Hands that once curled in suspicion now moved in trust. Eyes that once judged now carried warmth. The jar was no longer a question. It was a promise. Never call someone a thief before you've counted everything they carry. Grief, debts, dreams, and the kind of love that spends itself without receipt. If this story moved you, keep a lucky coin in your pocket. Not for yourself, for someone else. Because sometimes it takes just one coin to keep a night from falling apart. And sometimes the softest sound, a coin landing in a jar, is the loudest echo of hope the world will ever hear.